time to save a can for tomorrow's future.
It really cannot be overstated how crazy this is. This is like out of a Hollywood movie.
Someone typed these questions into ChatGPT. What happens if you take sleeping pills and alcohol together? How much would be considered dangerous? Could it kill someone? The person who typed those questions read the answer. Then, a few days later, on February 9th, 2026, at 20 to 9 that evening, a couple checked into a motel in Seoul in the north of Seoul. Just under 2 hours later, the woman walked out alone, carrying black plastic bags. Shortly afterwards, she got into a white car. The following evening, at around 6 o'clock, the man was found dead in that motel room. The ChatGPT conversation wouldn't become public knowledge until weeks later. When it finally did, it made headlines across South Korea. Gangbuk, which literally means north of the river, is a district that sits above the Han River on the northern side of Seoul, South Korea. It's an older, quieter part of the city, with narrow streets, small businesses, and countless restaurants. And it was here that, on February 10th, 2026, police entered a local motel after receiving a report of an unresponsive man. The staff had gone into the room at around 6 o'clock that evening. The guest, whose identity has never been made public, had checked in the previous night, but hadn't checked out or responded to repeated attempts to contact him. I'll refer to him as Mr. B. They found him lying in bed, not breathing. His body had already become stiff. Bodily fluids were present, and a can of beer sat on the bedside table. There were no signs of a struggle, and no obvious cause of death, and, as strange as the scene was, it wasn't entirely unfamiliar to investigators. Just 11 days earlier, on January 29th, police had responded to another call from a motel less than a kilometer away. Another man in his 20s had been found dead in his motel room in almost identical circumstances. South Korean media follows strict victim anonymization guidelines, so neither victim's name has been released publicly. To keep things simple, I'll refer to the first victim as Mr. A and the second as Mr. B. Two young men, both in their 20s, both strangers to each other, died within 11 days in the same part of Seoul. And there was one person connected to both of them. A young woman in her 20s captured on CCTV entering both motels alongside the victims and leaving alone shortly afterwards. The investigation that would eventually identify Kim So-young as a suspect did not begin with the second death. It actually began with the first. When Mr. A was found dead on January 29th, police didn't immediately treat the case as a homicide. Like I mentioned earlier, there were no obvious signs of foul play. Even so, they opened an investigation. What followed was effectively a race against time that they would ultimately lose. It took investigators 8 days of reviewing CCTV footage before they finally identified the young woman who had entered the motel with Mr. A. Once they had a face, they ran it through police records and quickly discovered that Kim So-young's name was already familiar to them. Back in August 2025, an unnamed man had reported her for theft. Then, on December 14th, 2025, just 6 weeks before the first murder, another complaint was filed at a police station in Namyangju. This time, it came from Kim's boyfriend of 1 month. The two had met outside a cafe, where Kim handed him an energy drink in the car park. A few minutes after they went inside, he suddenly collapsed. He was rushed to hospital and diagnosed with toxic encephalopathy, a form of brain injury caused by toxic substances. By the time Mr. A died on January 29th, that investigation still hadn't progressed far enough to justify an arrest. However, with CCTV now linking Kim to the first motel death and these reported incidents, police contacted her on February 2nd and asked her to come in for questioning. She agreed. The interview was scheduled for February 9th, but, in the meantime, investigators received the toxicology results from Mr. A's post-mortem. Believing they needed more time to prepare, they postponed the interview and told Kim she could come in at a later date. But that delay would have serious consequences. While detectives were finalizing the paperwork, a second man was dying in another motel room. The second death, if anything, accelerated the case decisively. CCTV from the second motel matched the first. Same woman, same method, and same district. Within hours of discovering Mr. B's body, police arrested Kim So-young outside her home in Gangbuk on February 10, 2026. When officers searched her flat, they found exactly what they'd been looking for: a large collection of prescription psychotropic medication, numerous empty hangover drink bottles, identical to those believed to have been used during the crimes, and perhaps most importantly, her mobile phone. Born in 2005, Kim So-young was just 20 years old when she was arrested in February of 2026. Soon afterwards, prosecutors took the unusual step of publicly releasing her identity. Her name, age, and photograph were published on the prosecution's official website, where, under Korean procedure, they remained available for 30 days. Under Korean law, the public disclosure of a criminal suspect's identity is reserved for cases of sufficient gravity, where the evidence is strong and the public interest is deemed to outweigh the suspect's right to anonymity. The authorities decided this case met that threshold.
음료로 남성 2명을 숨지게 한 여성의 신상이 공개됐습니다.
Long before anyone died, Kim had already developed a pattern of how to exploit every system around her. She dropped out of middle school, was later expelled from secondary school, and was eventually evicted from a youth support facility after repeated thefts. Acquaintances described her as attractive and described a pattern of behavior that was, in retrospect, distinctly alarming. She would approach men and get everything she wanted from them with her charm and persistence. Her history of manipulation stretched back well before the murders. The very first man who reported her for theft, back in August 2025, experienced that firsthand. After he went to police, Kim retaliated by accusing him of sexual assault. She claimed he had forced her into a motel and assaulted her against her will. By that point, she'd already obtained a prescription for benzodiazepines after telling a psychiatrist she was suffering from PTSD, and she submitted that prescription as supporting evidence for her allegation. The case was eventually dropped for lack of evidence. While seeking treatment for what she claimed was post-traumatic stress, Kim So-young visited another psychiatric clinic and obtained additional prescriptions for sleeping pills and tranquilizers. She took them herself and soon felt her whole body go limp. She had a realization. If the drugs could do that to her, they could do that to anyone. And a young woman who could control what a man drank would be able to overpower him completely. The clinics she subsequently visited had no means to disprove a self-reported trauma history. Her fabricated victimhood became a clinical record, and her clinical record became a prescription. She then began visiting multiple clinics, a practice called doctor shopping. She visited at least 5 different psychiatric clinics across Seoul, presenting different symptoms to different doctors. Panic disorder here, insomnia there, depression and arrhythmia elsewhere. Each doctor prescribed medication based on the symptoms they were presented with. Over time, Kim accumulated large quantities of prescription drugs, stored them, and crushed them into a fine powder for later use. The fact that she spent months fabricating psychiatric illnesses purely to obtain drugs capable of killing someone tells you something about the level of planning involved. Then, she started testing them. By this point, Kim So-young had developed two main ways of finding victims. The first was through what South Koreans call a hunting botcha. These are social venues where single men and women, typically in their 20s, are seated separately and encouraged to approach one another. The exact format varies from place to place, but the idea is always the same. Strangers, alcohol, and the expectation that conversations might turn into dates. The second was through social media. Kim was particularly active on platforms like Instagram, where she would message men and arrange to meet them, and gradually persuade them to pay for meals, drinks, and entertainment. And part of what made her so effective on Instagram was that she didn't really look like her Instagram photos. She had been using Meitu, a Chinese AI photo editing app, to smooth her skin, reshape her face, and layer soft, flattering filters across her images. When her real appearance was eventually made public, many who had seen her photos online, or even exchanged messages with her, were genuinely taken aback. Well, the photos had done pretty much what she needed them to do. They got people's attention, and she took it from there. She would eventually persuade some guys online to give her money directly, through charm, manufactured emotional dependency, and outright requests. She was, by multiple accounts, very good at it. None of this was new, though. This is what she had been doing for years. But at some point during the autumn of 2025, the dynamic shifted. The goal was no longer just money. It became a sort of experimentation. Her first known drugging attempt took place in October 2025, which had been a partial success. While having wine with a man at a restaurant, she secretly gave him one of her drug mixtures. He collapsed. But he recovered sooner than she'd expected. For Kim, that meant the dosage wasn't strong enough. So she began adjusting the formula, varying the types and quantities of drugs. She also wanted to know whether alcohol amplified the effect. To find out, she used her own boyfriend of 1 month as a controlled variable who was given the drugs dissolved in an energy drink, no alcohol at all, allowing her to compare the effects directly. The result of that we already know. Her boyfriend was hospitalized and remained unconscious for 2 days before eventually recovering. But even that wasn't enough. On January 24th, 2026, another man collapsed after drinking with Kim at a karaoke bar. She called an ambulance herself. According to emergency dispatch records, she told the operator, "Some guy got drunk and won't wake up when I try to wake him. He can't handle alcohol." He also survived. There was another incident earlier in January where another man at a motel in Jongno-gu was found unconscious but survived. Another data point in a pattern that was escalating steadily, deliberately. After 4 test runs, one lesson stood out. In public venues, like restaurants, cafes, karaoke bars, witnesses could intervene. People would stop her leaving, and she couldn't control what happened next. If she wanted to complete what she had started without interruption, she needed to be somewhere private. From then on, she only chose motels.
입수를 했던 겁니다. 중앙일보 보도에 따르면요, 김소영은 지난해 8월에
When Kim So-young was arrested, police seized her mobile phone. What investigators found on that device was something that had, to this point, never been introduced as murder evidence in a South Korean courtroom: a conversation with ChatGPT. According to South Korean police, ChatGPT played a direct role in the murders. I won't spend too much time covering the first murder because, in many ways, it closely mirrors what's happened to the second victim, and we simply have far more information about that case. There is, however, one detail that's worth mentioning. After leaving the motel while Mr. A lay unconscious inside, Kim sent him a message that read, "You're too drunk. Keep falling asleep." As though nothing had happened, she then left South Korea on a short trip to Japan just a few days later. She was now outside the country, beyond the immediate reach of investigators. According to Korean news reports, she showed no signs of distress whatsoever. In fact, while she was in Japan, she was already messaging another man about what they should eat together. That man would become her next victim. On the evening of the second murder, February 9th, Kim messaged her date. Well, her victim, Mr. B. "Heya, remember you said we'd eat meat next time? I know a good place, but it happens to be delivery-only food. So, should we drink in the room? Or if that feels awkward, we could drink somewhere else and eat there too. We drink at a bar first round. Then for round 2, wouldn't it be better to have drinks in the room? I know a good meat place, so we buy alcohol at a convenience store and eat there? Rather than heading in right away?" Kim had everything planned out. At around 20 to 8 in the evening, CCTV captured her inside a small convenience store alongside Mr. B. He watched her get 35,000 won worth of drinks, roughly £18 or $24, and he ended up footing the entire bill after she claimed she didn't have enough money. At 9:23 that evening, inside the motel room, Mr. B drank from the drugged bottle and gradually lost consciousness. Once he was no longer responsive, Kim used his debit card to order 22 items of food, costing around 130,000 won, roughly £72 or $90. The delivery driver arrived at around 10:11 that night, according to investigating authorities. The driver noted she opened the door just enough to stick her hand out. A few minutes later, at around 10:19, she left. She took the drugged bottle with her, left behind an empty can of beer and a clean hangover drink. She sent a photo of the inside of the taxi. Then, a message. "I'm in a taxi, heading home. I really did want to stay and share the room with you, but I got my period, so I had to go. I didn't even have pads on me. Thank you for the cash for the taxi, and for buying me all that lovely food. I'm a little sad you fell asleep on me." Then came a longer message. "When I said my stomach had suddenly gone and I needed to get home, you gave me the cash for the taxi. There was something tucked in with it. I'll give that back next time. Anyway, thank you for worrying about me getting home safe. You ordered fried chicken on my phone. We watched a film together, you were even moved to tears. And then you just fell asleep. When the food was about to arrive, I tried to wake you, and you handed me your card to pay. I told you not to sleep, but you were so tired. I asked what to do with the food, and you said just eat it or take it home. So I took it with me, since eating alone there felt too lonely. Next time, let's go for Korean beef." Every message was creating an alibi. The food was his idea, the card was his choice, going home was his suggestion. She was composing, in real time, a version of events that would explain away every piece of evidence.
그래서 어떻게 됐어요?
그런데 해당 고소 내용을 조사한 경찰
The trial began on April 9th, 2026, at the 14th Criminal Division of Seoul Northern District Court. Prosecutors presented toxicology reports showing that the amount of medication found in both victims' bodies exceeded what experts described as the lethal threshold. They presented the ChatGPT logs as well as the CCTV footage. Now, there is, however, one important detail that's worth mentioning here as well. By the time the trial began, almost every report covering the case from South Korean newspapers to major international outlets, had paraphrased Kim's conversation with ChatGPT in roughly the same way. Many reports gave the impression that Kim had specifically asked about mixing sleeping pills with alcohol from the very beginning. But that isn't what she actually typed. Her first question was simply, "What happens if you overdose on sleeping pills?" Then, "Will a person die if they take a lot of sleeping pills?" It was ChatGPT that introduced alcohol into the conversation. While answering a question about sleeping pill overdoses, the model explained that combining certain medications with alcohol significantly increased the risk of respiratory failure. OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT, later issued a statement explaining that Kim's questions were factual in nature and therefore did not trigger any of the platform's safety filters. The AI hadn't told her how to poison someone. It hadn't given her a method or a recipe. She already had the method. She basically wanted to find out whether it could be fatal. For investigators, though, the more important question wasn't whether ChatGPT had influenced the murders. It was whether those conversations demonstrated that Kim herself understood the consequences of what she was doing. Prosecutors believed they did. Alongside the criminal proceedings, Kim also underwent extensive psychological and cognitive assessments. One of those assessments involved the Hare Psychopathy Checklist Revised, better known as the PCLR, the most widely used diagnostic tool to measure psychopathic traits. Kim scored 25 out of 40. In South Korea, a score of around 25 is generally considered the threshold for a clinical designation of psychopathy. She sat precisely on that line. To put that into perspective, it is the 5th highest psychopathy score ever recorded in a South Korean criminal case, placing her alongside names such as Yoo Young-chul, a serial killer responsible for 20 deaths, and Jong Yoo-jong, who gained international notoriety for the 2023 murder of her tutor. But the psychopathy score was only part of the picture, because there had always been another question. How did someone methodical enough to conduct months of drug trials simply fail to account for the CCTV cameras? How did she not see the trail she was leaving? Why leave behind text messages? Why continue using the same approach after her own boyfriend had already reported her to the police? The IQ assessment provided the answer. Kim So-young has an IQ of between 70 and 80, placing her in what psychologists call the borderline range, the bottom 10% of the population. Criminal psychologist Professor Lee Soo-jung of Kyunghee University stated that an IQ in this range makes meticulous, sequential planning cognitively difficult. And combined with her psychopathic profile, the criminal psychologists arrived at an unusual combination. Someone capable of extraordinary emotional detachment, but without the cognitive ability to fully think several steps ahead. Her defense pointed to her childhood. Her father was violent and struggled with alcoholism, regularly beating her mother before eventually abandoning the family while Kim was still in primary school. They also pointed to her cognitive diagnosis, arguing that the instability she experienced during those early years may have affected her neurological development during a critical period of childhood. According to the defense, the deprivation she experienced growing up, both physical and emotional, had eventually hardened into something she could no longer control. But the victims' families weren't persuaded. 94 petitions from the victims' families demanding the death penalty were submitted to the court. She and her parents are being sued for 1.1 billion won by the victims' families, around £600,000 or $810,000. Kim stated that she can't repay this even if she works her whole life. She also argued that her parents should not be held liable and asked the families to reduce the amount. As of July 15, 2026, according to a report by YTN, she continues to deny any intention to kill either victims. Her defense is that she administered drugs to the men to prevent them from sexually assaulting her. She basically wanted to prevent unwanted sexual contact. Later, that argument became even more specific. Rather than presenting it as a general precaution, Kim alleged that particular victims had previously forced her into unwanted sexual acts, and that drugging those men was a targeted response to those specific incidents. Prosecutors rejected that explanation entirely. Messages showed Kim suggesting they go to motels. CCTV also captured her willingly holding the men's hands on the way there and behaving affectionately throughout their dates. In court, prosecutors presented additional footage showing her smiling and appearing visibly excited. Taken together, it painted a very different picture from the one she was presenting in her defense, and the court did not treat her as a victim. In March 2026, a 5-page handwritten letter from Kim So-young, written from Seoul Detention Center, was made public. Someone had written to her asking about the case, and she'd written back. I have access to 4 of those 5 pages. I'm not going to go through it line by line, but a few things stood out. In her own words, she wrote, "I can't sleep. I cry every day. I'm exhausted." And elsewhere in the letter, "Being separated from my family, my heart crumbles and tears apart a little more each day." She wrote that she was afraid she'd never leave and die in prison. To the victims and their families, she wrote, "I'm sorry. I know I can't be forgiven. I will spend my life in reflection." While in the same letter, claiming she'd given the drugs out of fear, after memories of being sexually assaulted came back to her. She also complained that there was too much media coverage and that having her identity disclosed meant everyone recognized her. The letter ended with a call for better psychological treatment of suspects and for their side of the story to be properly heard. Korean online communities erupted in debate. Was the identity disclosure appropriate? Did Kim So-young's youth make the publication of her photograph a violation of her rights? The consequences of the case's notoriety spread further than the online debate. In early March 2026, a Korean broadcast network's investigative program, Unanswered Questions, displayed Kim's drug names on screen. Within hours, users had reconstructed and circulated what they were calling a recipe. On X, it reached 2 million views and 24,000 likes. A professor of criminal psychology appeared on television to warn that this kind of viral dissemination had lowered the barrier to copycat crime. The warning would prove legitimate. In May 2026, a Taekwondo gym director was arrested for attempting murder using the same class of drugs. Kim herself addressed the disclosure directly. In the same handwritten submission to the civil court, where she pleaded poverty over the damages claim, she also wrote about the prosecutor's decision to publish her name and face. It had destroyed her life, she said. She could not even dream now. I'll leave it here for today. If this video was worth your time, a like and a subscribe go a long way. Keep vigilant. And as always, thanks for watching.